Ethan Calloway opened his front door at 6:47 in the morning after a long night shift, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, his wrinkled security guard uniform still clinging to his tired frame. All he wanted was a cup of coffee and a few hours of rest before the world needed him again. But this morning, the world arrived early. A woman stood on his porch wearing an elegant red dress, striking and impossible to ignore. A dark sedan parked at the curb that cost more than 3 years of his salary. Her posture was calm, confident, and her cold gray eyes locked onto him as though she had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. "Are you the husband of Sarah Calloway?" No one said his wife's name like that, with the voice of someone carrying a secret powerful enough to shatter everything he thought he knew. But to understand what that question would do to Ethan Calloway, you have to go back 12 hours, to the evening before, when his biggest worry was whether he had enough pasta in the cabinet to feed his daughter dinner. Ethan pulled his old pickup truck into the parking lot of Millbrook Elementary at 3:15 that afternoon, the engine rattling like it might give out any second. Lily was already waiting by the fence, her little backpack dragging on the ground, her thick glasses slightly crooked on her nose. She spotted him and ran, and Ethan crouched down to catch her, lifting her up with the kind of ease that made it look like she weighed nothing, even though his back had been aching since Tuesday. She smelled like crayons and grape juice. She pressed her face into his neck and said, "Daddy, I drew you a picture of a dinosaur eating a taco." He told her it was the best dinosaur he had ever seen. He meant it. They drove home through the quiet streets of Millbrook, Connecticut, a small town about 45 minutes outside Hartford, where the tallest building was the church steeple, and the biggest event of the year was the autumn harvest fair on the town green. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your business, and still pretended they did not. Their house was a rented 2-bedroom bungalow on Chestnut Lane, with a sagging porch, a driveway cracked down the middle, and a front yard that needed mowing. Ethan had promised himself he would mow it this weekend, the same promise he had made for 3 weekends running. Inside, the house was clean but spare, the kind of clean that came from not owning enough things to make a real mess. He had sold most of what Sarah left behind in the year after she died: the jewelry, the nice dishes, the set of matching luggage they had bought for a honeymoon trip to Maine that they never took because Lily got an ear infection and the refund window had closed. He sold the necklace her mother had given her and used the money to cover 2 months of rent. He sold the good china and bought Lily a winter coat. The only thing he kept was Sarah's old denim jacket, still hanging on the hook behind the front door, faded at the elbows, the collar slightly frayed. Lily sometimes pressed her face into it and said it smelled like Mommy. Ethan had not washed it in 3 years. He never would. Dinner was pasta again, penne with butter and a little parmesan from a green can, the kind that cost $1.69. Lily did not complain. She never complained. She sat at the kitchen table, swinging her legs and telling him about a boy named Marcus who ate a crayon during art class, and about how her teacher, Miss Gentry, said Lily's drawing of a sunset was the most colorful one in the whole room. Ethan listened to every word like she was delivering a presidential address. After dinner, he helped her with her reading homework, sounding out words together at the kitchen table while the faucet dripped in a rhythm he had stopped noticing months ago. Then he read her a chapter from a book about a mouse who sailed across the ocean, doing all the voices, making Lily giggle until her glasses fogged up. When it was time for bed, Lily asked him the question she asked at least twice a week. "Daddy, how come you never go to sleep when I go to sleep?" Ethan tucked the blanket under her chin and smiled. "Because I am a superhero at night," he said. "I protect the whole town while you are dreaming." She considered this seriously, then nodded, satisfied. He kissed her forehead and turned off the light, standing in the doorway for a moment, watching her settle in. On the wall above her bed was a drawing she had made weeks ago, taped up with a single piece of Scotch tape. It showed 3 people: a tall man, a small girl with glasses, and a woman with long yellow hair floating above them, surrounded by stars. Underneath, In her careful 6-year-old handwriting, it said, "Mommy in heaven." Ethan stood there longer than he needed to, then quietly pulled the door shut. At 9:45, Ruth Beckman from next door came over. Ruth was 62, broad-shouldered, sharp-tongued, and the closest thing to family Ethan had in Millbrook. She watched Lily 3 or 4 nights a week while Ethan worked, and she refused to take a single dollar for it. He had tried. She told him the day he paid her was the day she stopped coming, and he believed her. Ethan changed into his security uniform in the bathroom, the navy blue shirt with the Millbrook Commerce Plaza patch on the shoulder, clipped his badge to his belt, and grabbed his keys. Ruth was already settled on the couch with a crossword puzzle and a thermos of decaf. "She is out cold," Ethan told her. Ruth waved him off. "Go. I have got 13 across to figure out." He drove through the dark streets of Millbrook in his truck, past the closed diner and the gas station and the elementary school where Lily's drawings hung in the hallway. His shift ran from 10 at night to 6 in the morning. 8 hours of walking empty corridors, checking locked doors, watching security monitors that almost never showed anything worth watching. The pay was $14.75 an hour. No dental, no vision, and the health insurance had a deductible so high it might as well not exist. Lily's eye appointment was 2 months overdue. Her glasses prescription needed updating. The bill from her last visit was sitting on the kitchen counter under a magnet shaped like a ladybug, and every time he looked at it, the number seemed to get larger. But Ethan did not think about money the way most people assumed. He was not afraid of being poor. He had been poor his whole life. What he was afraid of, what kept him awake on the nights he was not working, was the idea that Lily might grow up and look back and think her father had not tried hard enough. The woman was still standing on his porch when the memory of last night faded and the present returned. 6:47 in the morning. Ethan blinked against the pale November light and looked at her again. She had not moved. Her posture was rigid, composed, almost rehearsed, like someone who had practiced standing in front of mirrors until every angle looked intentional. The sedan behind her was black, polished to a mirror finish, with Connecticut plates. Her suit was not the kind you bought at a department store. Her shoes were not the kind you wore to walk on gravel. Everything about her screamed money, the kind of money that did not need to announce itself because it was obvious in every stitch. "Sarah passed away 3 years ago," Ethan said, his voice flat. "Who are you?" The woman introduced herself as a representative of a family assistance foundation. She said she was conducting outreach to single-parent households in the area and that she had information suggesting Ethan's daughter might qualify for a medical support grant, specifically for pediatric vision care. Her delivery was polished, almost too polished, like a speech given one too many times in front of a bathroom mirror until every pause sounded natural. Ethan listened with his arms crossed over his wrinkled uniform, his badge still clipped to his belt, the name tag reading Calloway in small block letters. Nothing about this made sense. No charity sent a woman in a $500 suit to knock on a stranger's door before 7 in the morning in a town this small, driving a car that cost more than most houses on the entire block. The story did not fit the presentation. And Ethan Calloway, for all his exhaustion, was not a man who missed mismatches. He told her, politely but firmly, that his family did not need assistance, and he thanked her for her time. But as he moved to close the door, he noticed something. The woman's gaze had drifted past him, through the narrow gap between the door and the frame, into the house. Her gray eyes moved across the kitchen, the crayon drawings on the refrigerator, the tiny pair of glasses sitting on the counter, Sarah's denim jacket still hanging on its hook. And then her eyes found it, the framed photograph of Lily on the shelf beside a dried flower arrangement. Lily grinning with her 2 front teeth missing, her dark hair pulled back in a lopsided ponytail. The woman's expression shifted. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but Ethan saw it. Her jaw tightened, her fingers curled around the strap of her black leather bag. For just a moment, the composure cracked, and underneath it was something raw, something Ethan could not name. He closed the door. She left, but the narrator knows what Ethan did not. The woman's name was not attached to any foundation. Her name was Caroline Ashford, and she was the chief executive officer of Ashford Lyle Holdings, a real estate and energy conglomerate headquartered in Hartford. She had been searching for 2 years. She had hired private investigators, combed through sealed records, followed dead ends across 3 states, all to find the daughter she had been forced to give up 6 years ago. Every trail led to the same name: Sarah Calloway. A woman in Millbrook, Connecticut, who had adopted a baby girl through a closed adoption agency in Hartford. And now Sarah was dead, and the child was living with a man who had no idea what his wife had never told him. Inside the sedan, Caroline loosened her grip on the steering wheel and exhaled. Her hands were shaking. For the first time in 6 years, she had stood less than 10 feet from her daughter, close enough to hear the echo of a child's laughter from inside the house, and she had been forced to play the part of a stranger. Caroline checked into the Westin Hotel in Hartford that afternoon and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time without moving. Then she called a lawyer, not the legal team at Ashford Lyle, and certainly not Diana Marsh, her father's personal attorney, but a private family law attorney she had found on her own, a woman named Sandra Chen, who had no ties to the Ashford name. Caroline asked one question: what legal rights does a biological mother have in a closed adoption when the adoptive parent has died? Sandra was quiet for a moment. Then she said the answer was, in most cases, almost none. The surviving spouse held legal guardianship, unless Ethan Calloway voluntarily agreed to contact, or unless the court found him unfit. Caroline had no standing to petition for access to Lily. The law treated the adoption as final. The biological mother, in the eyes of the state, did not exist. Caroline hung up and stared at the wall. She thought about what Sandra had said, and then she thought about the photograph on the shelf. Lily's face, the glasses, the missing teeth, the crooked ponytail. She thought about how the little girl's eyes were gray, the same shade of gray that looked back at Caroline every morning in the mirror. 6 years ago, Caroline had been 32 years old, unmarried, and 8 weeks pregnant. The father was a man she had dated briefly, someone who disappeared the moment the word pregnant entered the conversation. Caroline had been terrified and elated in equal measure, a combination she had never felt before. She told her father. Gerald Ashford sat behind his mahogany desk in the Ashford Tower and listened without expression. When she finished, he gave her 2 options. She could keep the child and lose everything: the inheritance, the CEO position, the family name, the apartment, the car, the future that had been mapped out for her since birth. Or she could sign the closed adoption papers, let the child go, and continue the life the Ashfords had built for her. Gerald did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Gerald Ashford had never been a man who shouted. He controlled rooms the way winter controls a river, slowly, silently, until everything was frozen exactly where he wanted it. The architecture of his power was so complete that raising his voice would have been redundant. He simply presented the facts as he saw them, and the facts, in Gerald's world, always pointed toward one inevitable conclusion. Caroline, who had never made a major decision without her father's approval, who had never lived outside the walls he built, who had never even signed a lease or opened a bank account that Gerald did not oversee, signed the adoption papers 3 weeks later in a sterile conference room in Hartford, with fluorescent lights humming overhead and a pen that felt heavier than anything she had ever held. She was not told where the baby went. She was not given a name, an address, a photograph, or a single detail that might allow her to find the child later. The only thing she managed to keep was a hospital wristband the size of her thumb, with a date and a weight printed in fading ink, which she tucked into her wallet behind her driver's license, where Gerald would never think to look. Now, sitting in a Hartford hotel room, Caroline made a decision that had been building inside her for 2 years. She would go back to Millbrook. She would rent a house, use a different name, wear different clothes, and become someone ordinary. She would find a way to be near Lily, to see the life her daughter was living, before she decided what to do next. She did not want to take Lily. She did not want to destroy what Ethan had built. She only wanted to know that her daughter was safe and loved, and if she was, then maybe that would be enough. Back in Millbrook, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with Ruth that evening and told her about the woman on the porch. Ruth frowned. "Rich people looking for charity cases," she said, "makes them feel better about their stock portfolios." Ethan laughed, but it was thin. That night, during his shift, walking the empty hallways of Millbrook Commerce Plaza, he kept circling back to the same questions. How did she know Sarah's name? Why did she look at Lily's photograph like that? And what was it he saw behind those gray eyes in the second before she turned away? 2 weeks later, a woman named Cora Jennings moved into a small rental house on Birch Street, 2 blocks from Ethan's place on Chestnut Lane. She told the neighbors she was a freelance editor who needed a quiet town to finish a manuscript. She wore jeans and plain sweaters. She walked to the post office and the coffee shop and the little grocery store on Main Street. She smiled at people and remembered their names. Within a week, she was part of the scenery, just another face in a town where new faces were rare enough to be noticed, but not rare enough to be suspicious. Cora Jennings was Caroline Ashford. She saw Lily for the second time at the Millbrook General Store on a Tuesday afternoon. Ethan was in the cereal aisle with his reading glasses perched on his nose, comparing prices on 2 boxes, and Lily stood beside him in her puffy red coat, standing on her tiptoes, straining to reach a box of cereal on the top shelf with both arms outstretched. Caroline walked over without thinking, the way a person walks toward something magnetic, and reached up to grab the box, bringing it down to Lily's level. The girl took it with both hands and beamed. "Thank you." Then she tilted her head and studied Caroline's face with the serious, unfiltered attention that only children possess. "You have eyes like mine," she said. It was not a question or a compliment. It was an observation, stated with the certainty of someone who had spent a lot of time looking at her own reflection and knew exactly what her eyes looked like. Ethan glanced over. He noticed it too. The gray, the shape, the way the light from the fluorescent tubes caught them at the same angle. But he filed it away as coincidence. People in small towns noticed resemblances that were not really there. It was just what people did when they spent too much time around the same faces. That night, Caroline sat alone on the bare floor of the rental house, her back against the wall, the only light coming from a street lamp through the window. She held the hospital wristband in her palm, running her thumb over the faded ink, the date, the weight, 3 pounds and 2 ounces. She cried without making a sound, her shoulders trembling, her breath catching in short, broken gasps. It was the first time she had heard her daughter's voice. Lily had smiled at her. Lily had spoken to her, and Lily had no idea who she was. A few days later, Ethan ran into Cora at the coffee shop on Main Street. He was picking up a large black coffee before his night shift, and she was sitting at a corner table with a laptop and a notebook. They exchanged a nod, then a few words. He mentioned Lily. Caroline asked about her carefully, the way a friendly neighbor would. Ethan's face softened the way it always did when he talked about his daughter. "She draws everything," he said. "If we run out of paper, she draws on the back of the electric bill." Caroline smiled and asked if Lily liked school. Ethan said she loved it, especially art class. Under the table, Caroline's hands were clenched into fists, so tight her knuckles were white. Everything shifted the day Diana Marsh arrived in Millbrook. Gerald Ashford had been monitoring Caroline's secondary credit card, the one she thought he did not know about. And when the charges started appearing in a small Connecticut town with no obvious business connection, Gerald did what Gerald always did. He sent Diana. Diana Marsh was 45, immaculate, precise, and completely loyal to Gerald. She arrived in Millbrook on a Wednesday morning and went directly to Ethan's house, presenting herself as a legal representative from a child welfare advocacy organization. She asked Ethan questions that were pointed enough to draw blood. What was his monthly income? Did Lily have health insurance? Who cared for the child during his overnight shifts? How long had it been since Lily's last eye examination? Was he aware that delaying pediatric vision care could result in irreversible damage? Did he understand the developmental implications of inconsistent adult supervision? Each question landed like a small stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of implication outward. The questions were not designed to get answers. They were designed to make Ethan feel like a man standing on a floor that was about to give way. Someone was evaluating whether Ethan Calloway was fit to raise his own daughter, and every honest answer he gave seemed to prove that he was not. Ethan felt the ground tilt beneath him. He had never felt ashamed of what he provided for Lily. Not until that woman sat in his kitchen and turned his sacrifices into evidence of failure. That evening, he sat at Ruth's kitchen table and told her everything. The woman from the foundation weeks ago, and now this lawyer with her clipboard and her careful questions. Ruth's face went dark with fury. "Anyone who says you cannot raise that child will have to go through me first," she said. "I will testify in any court in this country." But Ruth's loyalty, fierce as it was, could not quiet the fear that had taken root in Ethan's chest. He had no savings. He had no lawyer. If someone with real power decided to take Lily, what exactly could he do about it? Meanwhile, Caroline saw the damage Diana's visit had done. She could read the tension in Ethan's posture when she saw him outside his house the next day, the way he kept glancing down the street like he expected someone to appear. She knew her father's playbook. Diana was the opening move, the reconnaissance. Gerald was calculating, measuring, building a case. And Caroline knew that when Gerald Ashford decided to act, he did not stop until he won. That Saturday, Caroline noticed the broken fence panels along Ethan's yard. Lily played outside most afternoons, and 2 of the wooden slats were hanging loose. Caroline offered to help fix them. Ethan hesitated. He did not like accepting help, not from anyone, and especially not from someone he barely knew. But Lily tugged on Caroline's sleeve and said, "Stay for dinner, please," with such earnest conviction that Ethan could not say no. They sat at the small kitchen table, the 3 of them, pasta again, penne with butter, apple juice from a box. Lily talked about school, about her friend Ava, about a stray cat she saw near the playground. She showed Caroline a drawing of the cat, orange with green eyes and a crooked tail. Caroline held the drawing and studied it like it was hanging in a museum. She could barely eat. The tightness in her chest was enormous, a physical pressure that made it hard to breathe because her daughter was sitting right there, laughing, reaching for more juice, alive and whole and utterly unaware. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, 2 days after the dinner. Ethan decided to clean out the garage, something he had been avoiding for 3 years. Lily was at Ruth's house, baking cookies. The garage was full of boxes that belonged to Sarah, things Ethan had shoved in there after the funeral because looking at them was like pressing on a bruise. He opened the first box. Insurance documents, old letters, a few ultrasound photos that made his throat tighten. And then, at the bottom, a sealed envelope from an adoption agency in Hartford, stamped with the words, "Confidential, do not discard." Ethan sat on the cold garage floor and opened it. Inside was a complete closed adoption file. Sarah Calloway had adopted a baby girl from a Hartford agency 6 years ago. The birth mother's identity was redacted, blacked out with thick marker under a privacy seal. The adoption was finalized on March 14th, 7 months before Ethan and Sarah met at a friend's barbecue in Middletown, where she showed up late with a baby on her hip and a smile that made Ethan forget every word he had planned to say to anyone else that afternoon. Lily was not Sarah's biological child, and Ethan, who had married Sarah when Lily was 8 months old, who had always believed Lily was Sarah's daughter from a previous relationship that ended badly, a story Sarah told once and never elaborated on, had never been told the truth. Sarah had carried this secret through their entire marriage, through every bedtime story and every scraped knee and every parent-teacher conference and every drawing taped to the refrigerator, and she had taken it to her grave without a single word. Ethan sat there for a long time. His hands trembled. The paper shook. The truth did not make him love Lily less, not for a single second. He was her father. That was a fact as fixed as gravity, but Sarah had lied to him. Every day, every night, for years. And now a new fear, larger and colder than poverty, rose up from the floor of the garage and wrapped itself around him. If Lily had a biological mother somewhere out in the world, that person could come for her. That person could have lawyers and money and legal standing that Ethan did not. His greatest fear was no longer the overdue bill on the kitchen counter. It was losing Lily entirely. At the same hour, Caroline received a phone call from Diana Marsh. Diana's voice was flat and professional. She informed Caroline that Gerald had instructed the legal department at Ashford Lyle to prepare a petition for temporary guardianship of Lily Calloway. The argument would be straightforward. The child's current guardian had no biological connection, no financial stability, and no capacity to provide the resources available to the Ashford family. Gerald intended to use every tool at his disposal. Caroline went pale. She knew exactly what her father's legal machine could do to a man who worked the night shift as a security guard and could not afford an attorney. The adoption file contained the name of the agency in Hartford. Ethan drove there the following Monday, arriving before the office opened, waiting in his truck with the engine off and his hands on the steering wheel. When the doors opened, he went inside and asked to speak with someone about a closed adoption from 6 years ago. The woman behind the desk was sympathetic but firm. She could not release the biological mother's identity. Closed meant closed. But Ethan was not a man who gave up easily. He studied the paperwork again that night after his shift, reading every line by the dim light of the kitchen. One detail caught his eye. The adoption fees had been paid by a charitable trust, and the trust was registered to Ashford Lyle Holdings, Hartford, Connecticut. He typed the name into his phone. The first result was the company website. He clicked on the leadership page, and there she was. Caroline Ashford, Chief Executive Officer. The photograph showed a woman in a dark blazer with sharp cheekbones and gray eyes. Ethan stared at the screen. The face was the same face he had seen on his porch that morning weeks ago. The same face that now lived 2 blocks away and called herself Cora Jennings. The same gray eyes that his daughter said looked like hers. Everything collapsed at once. The charity story, the coincidental move to Millbrook, the questions about Lily, the way she held the drawing of the cat like it meant everything. All of it was a lie built on top of a truth that Ethan was never supposed to discover. He drove to her house that night. He did not knock gently. The door opened and Caroline stood there in a plain sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back, and she knew instantly from his face that the pretending was over. "You came here to take my daughter," he said. It was not a question. Caroline shook her head. Tears were already running down her face, and she did not wipe them away, as if doing so would be a lie, as if the tears were the most honest thing she had offered since arriving in Millbrook. She told him the truth, all of it, starting from the beginning. She told him about Gerald, about the ultimatum in the office with the mahogany desk, about the papers she signed in a sterile conference room when she was 32 and terrified and alone. She told him about the 2 years of searching, the private investigators who charged by the hour and delivered nothing for months, the dead ends across 3 states, the moment she finally found Sarah's name in an agency file and then learned, in the same breath, that Sarah was gone. She told him she came to Millbrook not to claim Lily, not to file papers or hire lawyers or fight for custody, but to see her, just to see her, to know she was alive and loved, to watch from a safe distance and carry that knowledge quietly for the rest of her life. She pulled the hospital wristband from her pocket and held it out. It was so small it barely covered her palm. The ink was almost gone. Ethan looked at the wristband. He looked at Caroline. And then he spoke, and his voice was rough, scraped raw with exhaustion and anger and grief. "Lily is my daughter," he said. "You may be the one who gave birth to her, But I am the one who stayed up every night when she had a fever. I am the one who taught her to tie her shoes. I am the one who told her that her mother is in heaven watching over her. I did not miss a single day." He turned and walked out. The door closed behind him. Caroline stood alone in the empty rental house. She knew he was right. And the deepest wound was not his rejection. It was the fact that she had no argument to offer in return. She had been absent for 6 years. It did not matter that the absence was not entirely her choice. The years were gone, and they could not be recovered. The legal papers arrived at Ethan's house on a Thursday afternoon, delivered by a courier in a gray sedan. The petition was filed by the legal department of Ashford Lyle Holdings on behalf of Gerald Ashford, seeking temporary guardianship of Lily Calloway. The filing cited multiple grounds. The current guardian had no biological relationship to the child. His annual income fell below the county median. He worked overnight shifts, leaving the child in the care of a non-relative neighbor. The child's medical needs, specifically her vision, had not been adequately addressed. The Ashford family, as biological relatives, could provide financial stability, educational opportunity, and comprehensive health care. Ethan read the document twice. His hands shook, but his jaw was set. Caroline flew to Hartford the next morning and walked into her father's office on the 32nd floor of Ashford Tower. Gerald was behind his desk, a broad mahogany surface polished to a dark shine, with a view of the city stretching out behind him. He looked smaller than she remembered, thinner, his skin carrying the gray undertone of a man whose body was beginning to fail. But his eyes were the same, hard, calculating, certain. Caroline told him to withdraw the petition. Gerald leaned back in his chair and said, "That child is Ashford blood. She deserves better than a rented house in a dying town." Caroline felt something lock into place inside her chest, something that had been loose and uncertain for years, finally clicking shut. She said, "You took my daughter from me 6 years ago. I will not let you do it again, to anyone." Gerald called her a traitor to the family, Caroline said. "You betrayed me first, the day you chose the company's reputation over your own granddaughter." The preliminary hearing was held in the Hartford County Family Court on a cold morning in December. The courtroom smelled like old wood and radiator heat. Ethan arrived alone. He could not afford an attorney, and the legal aid office in Millbrook had a 3-week waiting list. He sat in the courtroom in his cleanest clothes, a white button-down shirt he had ironed that morning for the first time in years, and dark pants with a crease he pressed in with the edge of a hardcover book because he did not own an iron that worked properly. His hands were folded on the table in front of him. Across the aisle, Gerald's legal team occupied 3 chairs, 2 men and a woman in suits that cost more than Ethan's truck. When the judge asked him to speak, he did not argue law. He did not cite precedents or statutes or case numbers. He simply talked about Lily. He talked about the pasta dinners and the drawings on the refrigerator. He talked about reading to her at night and doing all the voices. He talked about the way she laughed when he pretended to be a pirate, the way she insisted on wearing her glasses even in the bathtub, the way she drew a family on her bedroom wall with a mother made of yellow crayon and stars. He talked about wiping her glasses clean every morning before she put them on, making sure there were no smudges, because she told him once that she liked it when the world looked sharp. The judge asked, "Are you aware that the child is not your biological daughter?" Ethan looked directly at the bench and said, "I am aware, and it does not change a single thing." The courtroom door opened. Caroline Ashford walked in, not as a petitioner, not as someone claiming rights, but as a witness. She took the stand and stated her name, her real name, for the record. She confirmed that she was Lily's biological mother. She described the circumstances of the adoption, Gerald's ultimatum, the papers she signed under duress, the years of searching, and then she said the words that changed everything. She said that Ethan Calloway was the best father her daughter could ever have. She said that Lily was safe and loved and whole, and that no amount of money or resources could replace what Ethan had given that child every single day for 6 years. She asked the court to dismiss the petition and maintain Ethan's full guardianship. Gerald sat in the gallery behind the respondent's table, his face drained of color. The petition collapsed. 3 months passed. Gerald withdrew completely. The petition was denied, his legal team quietly disbanded the case, and the Ashford name retreated from Millbrook like a tide going out. Diana Marsh was reassigned to other matters and never returned to the town. Gerald did not crumble. Men like Gerald Ashford did not crumble. But for the first time in his life, he had lost a fight where his opponent had no weapons except the truth. Ethan and Caroline began again, slowly, carefully, like two people crossing a frozen lake, testing every step. Ethan allowed Caroline to see Lily, at first as Cora, Daddy's friend. Lily accepted this without question, because Lily accepted anyone who would sit on the floor with her and draw. Caroline learned how to be present without possessing. She sat in the yard and sketched animals with Lily. She read stories in funny voices. She brought colored pencils and construction paper. But she always let Ethan be the one Lily ran to when she fell, the one she called for at night, the one whose hand she reached for when they crossed the street. On the evenings after Lily fell asleep, Ethan and Caroline sat on the porch together. They did not make grand declarations. They did not discuss the future in sweeping terms. They talked about small things, about the weather, about the town, about a book Caroline was reading, about whether Ethan's truck would survive another winter. One night, Ethan asked, "Why did you not tell me the truth from the beginning?" Caroline looked at the dark yard and said, "Because I was afraid you would close the door, and I would lose her again." Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I understand." Ethan continued working as a security guard, but his supervisor, a man named Bill Torres, who had known him for 2 years and never once saw him call in sick or show up late, even on mornings when the truck would not start, and Ethan walked 2 miles through the snow to get there, arranged for him to switch to the day shift. It meant less per hour, but it meant being home when Lily slept, being there when she woke up, being the first face she saw in the morning instead of Ruth's, and that was worth more than any number on a paycheck. Caroline offered to help cover the cost of Lily's eye appointments, the ones that had been overdue for months. Ethan refused the first time, the way he always refused, instinctively, because accepting help felt like admitting defeat. The second time, Caroline looked at him and said, "This is not charity. This is my responsibility to my child." Ethan studied her face for a long moment, searching for something, perhaps pity, perhaps obligation, perhaps the kind of guilt that masquerades as generosity. He did not find any of those things. What he found was something simpler and harder to name. He nodded. On a Saturday morning in early spring, when the snow had finally melted and the first crocuses were pushing through the hard ground along the sidewalk, Lily sat at the kitchen table with a fresh sheet of paper and a new box of crayons. She worked carefully, her tongue poking out of the corner of her mouth the way it always did when she was concentrating on something important. Ethan poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, watching her. He did not ask what she was drawing. He had learned a long time ago that the best drawings came when you did not interrupt. When she was done, she carried the drawing to the refrigerator and carefully peeled off the old one, the one with Mommy in heaven, folding it gently and placing it in the kitchen drawer where she kept her favorite things. Then she taped the new drawing in its place. It showed 3 people standing on green grass under a blue sky. A tall man with brown hair, a small girl with big round glasses, and a woman with long dark hair standing beside them, her feet firmly on the ground, not floating in the sky, not surrounded by stars, just standing there, close enough to touch. Underneath, in her careful, crooked, 6-year-old handwriting, Lily had written 2 words, "My family." Ethan stood behind her and looked at the drawing for a long time. He did not speak. Then he looked through the kitchen window at the figure walking up the porch steps in the morning light, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a box of new colored pencils. He did not say anything. He just opened the door.